Welcome to Seniority Authority, the podcast where I track down experts to answer your questions on aging. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey. Let's get smarter about growing older. I have a question for you. Are you living the life that you imagined? Or somewhere along the way, did you stop imagining what life could look like? Are you just following a path that you feel has been set for you? Here's the thing. There's no roadmap for our futures. Today's 60 and 70-year-olds are living longer than any prior generation. We have more of that most precious of resources, time. The question is, what are you going to do with that time? If you dream of reimagining your life, stay tuned for my next guest who will help you do just that. Welcome to Seniority Authority. I'm your host, Kathleen Toomey. Many of our listeners are contemplating their next chapter or have already begun it, and today's guest has a lot of insight to offer. Michael Clinton is the former Hearst Magazine publisher and publishing director. Today, he is a marathoner, photographer, private pilot, avid traveler, vineyard owner, and, a best-selling author. Michael had an epiphany that led him to change his life. And he's here to share how that happened and how that can apply to you. Thanks to our show sponsor, the Riverwoods Group, Northern New England's largest family of nonprofit retirement communities, where active adults find community, purpose, and peace of mind. Visit riverwoodsgroup.org. Now let's hear from today's guest. Welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Kathleen, thank you so much for that nice introduction. Great to be with you.
Oh, it's so fantastic to have the chance to talk to you. I am thrilled that you're able to share your wisdom with our listeners, many of whom are right at that verge of thinking differently about how to approach their next chapter. But what I love is that you are ahead of the curve. You started thinking about changing your life in your mid-40s, in the midst of a successful career. Can you tell our listeners what sparked that?
Sure thing. I'll go back to the age of 39. I was the publisher of GQ magazine, which was a great, job. I had a great job. I was
phenomenal job.
A young publisher. I had been the publisher at 34, so I had an early start of success in my world. I had a great personal family life. Everything was great, but I was concerned that I was spending too much time defining myself by what I did as opposed to who I was. And, we all know those people, that trap that they fall into. They work, and their definition of who they are, their persona, their self-identity is tied up in their seat. And then the seat goes away, and we've all watched those people go off the cliff or get lost.
Exactly.
Right. And I just had a very early sort of aha moment about that. And I decided to start something that I write about in the book that you referenced called life layering. And life layering was a concept that we say, let's take your life as a partner, a spouse, your life as a parent, and the work that you do, and let's put them over to the side. And now, who are you, and what are the identities and the personas that you want to develop for yourself? And you can be 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 or older to start that process of creating a layer in your life that is the definition of who you are. So I'll give you a quick, my first layer, which happened then. I was about to turn 40, and I said, I have an adventure gene in me. So I decided I would, go to hike Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa with some friends. I would take a flying lesson, and I would take a race car driving school lesson. Just like let it rip,
Exactly. Sky's the limit.
Celebrate 40 in a big way. And I had a sort of an epiphany. First of all, I loved the flying lesson, and I became a pilot, as you mentioned. And I ultimately went and hiked many mountains around the world. But I had an epiphany that my 40s, I would proclaim that my 40s were going to be my adventure years. So my 40s, I began to pursue all sorts of great fun adventures, hiking all over the world, climbing, doing all the fun things that I defined as adventure. And now over the course of 28 years, I'm 68, and 68 is the new 68. And that's how we have to embrace.
Amen. I love that. I totally believe 68. Let's start sharing our true ages.
Exactly right. Own your age. And so, I now have 28 years of amazing adventures. I celebrated my 60th birthday by running a marathon in Antarctica. I've run all 7 continents at this point. I just keep adding to that layer. So, and then I added other layers. So if when I stepped out of the day-to-day of being the president and publishing director of Hearst Magazine, I had a lot of different definitions of who I was. I was an adventure traveler, I was a marathoner, I was a photographer, I was this, I was that. And so I had a pretty good transition into my next chapter, and then I manifested that in a lot of different ways. That life layering is one of the great lessons that I learned, and I'm passing on in the book with some great experiences and tools and resources and how you can do it.
Well, you know what I like about the life layering concept is so many people talk about a bucket list. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. But what you're talking about goes a level deeper. This is who I am. I am an adventurer. I am an athletic person. And I think that's important because you can check off a bucket list and still feel empty, still feel like what is at your core. So that's what I love about this concept that you explain in your book, the life layering.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it, because one-offs, it's like eating a little hors d'oeuvre and you're still hungry, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I say go deep on the layer and make it a lifelong pursuit. It doesn't have to have an end date. And especially something that's creative and something that's in your, like adventure traveling, you can make that a lifelong layer. And so it gives you a richness. I like to say when you have all these layers, you have this big, fat, delicious cake of life that is filled with like lots of layers and icing and goo. And it's really fantastic.
I love cake. So I like that. I like that concept. And I love the way you use language as the very core, very beginning of your career. You are a writer, a journalist, and you clearly think so carefully about language, as our listeners are going to learn once they read your book. And you talk about being a reimagineer.
Yeah.
And tell me about that, because I think one thing that I love about what you have done is you have laid a path for people. And so often we don't think about what is in our life besides what we do at work and what are our jobs at home. Right. Raising kids and right. Being a partner. So right. Tell me about the reimagineering.
Yeah, no, and I'll talk about words on the back end of this as well. But the one thing, my aha was when I was beginning to step out of the day-to-day of a 42-year career, magazine publishing, and being very successful in my chosen profession. Everything I would read about or listen to was about winding down. And, I had that realization that if you're in your 60s and you're healthy, you have a very good shot of living to be 95, maybe even 100. So
exactly.
Big, long run ahead of you with lots of possibilities of new things, new chapters, new ideas, new professions. So I wanted to find people who were like-minded to that idea. And I ultimately interviewed 40 people who have amazing stories, inspirational stories, who started entirely new things in their 50s and 60s. And, I call them the reimagineers because one of them, Stephanie, she was 53. She had been a writer and an editor. And at 53, she decided she wanted to become a medical doctor. And that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. 53. That's incredible.
What that journey's like.
Oh, yeah.
Forgetting 53. Well, she tells her story about how she did it, and she became a doctor in her early 60s. And her attitude was, I can do this for 20 years and make a huge contribution. And so I think this idea of a second career or a third career or a new relationship or a new lifestyle or lifelong learning, I decided to go back to school at 65 to get a master's degree at Columbia University writing papers, taking tests, doing quizzes, group projects. But that notion of lifelong learning, you can always learn something new. So the reimagineers are people who are writing the new script, as you said. They're rejecting the old script that we were given, that we're supposed to, quote, retire, play golf, hang out with the grandkids. And that's no longer sustainable for 30 years.
Absolutely not.
It was sustainable at a time when you, quote, retired and then you didn't live much longer, literally a few years, but it's not sustainable in the new longevity.
Yeah, no, I think, and I love that phrase, the new longevity, because that's what we're all experiencing.
Right.
And it calls, and this is what's exciting, and this is what boomers do, right? This is what boomers have been doing we've been smashing conventions and changing up the game plan since we came roaring into the universe. So this is exactly par for the course for us.
Well, it's funny you say that, because what I say to boomers when I'm talking to them is the boomers invented counterculture. So let's go counterculture to what we were supposed to do when we were 60, 70 plus, and go counter. And exactly right. The boomers, they're not only creating the role models for each other, but really for the next generation,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And just as we all know that the next generation, they're going to have multiple careers, not just multiple jobs. We are going to be pioneering and doing that. And that's exactly right. We are doing this for ourselves, but also for the next generation, because babies born today are likely to live 100 plus. So frightening concept, but there it is. And it's a good thing. And part of what we're trying to communicate to people is that living longer is an opportunity. So don't waste it.
Right.
Some of the words you use that I love in the book, instead of retire, you use rewire or refire, which I love.
Yeah. So this gets back to a mindset. I think there are so many words in the culture that are inherently ageist, and then we take them on as individuals because we're programmed by our culture, right? So we're supposed to retire. Retire is really an artificial construct that was created in the 1930s, as many people know. Never existed prior to government creating this phenomena that you're supposed to now atrophy. But it was, when it was created, once again, you left your job and you died a few years later. So you didn't really, it was really not a psychological issue per se. Well, today that construct hasn't changed. The world has changed, but the construct hasn't changed. So how do you rewire yourself and rewire your brain to think about a different kind of future? Other words that we took on is, I don't like midlife crisis. I like midlife awakening, because
I like that.
You've lived 25, 30 years as an adult. You know what you're good at. You know what you're bad at. I don't like age appropriate. I like person appropriate, because, people are becoming parents at 50. People are, going back to school at 60. People are living so let's forget, we all know the story. Well, I'm too old to do that. Well, I can't do that because I'm a certain age. That's really, self-imposed ageism. So taking on words is really important to deconstruct them and unpack them to create a different kind of mentality for yourself, let alone, the culture at large.
I completely believe in this. This is one of the things that have gotten me first fired up about the idea of changing the way people think about aging. Birthday cards. That is my, hill to die on. I hate that at age 40, all the birthday cards are doom and gloom. That is about as contemporary as listening to an 8-track tape. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore. We have to get with the times and change these old-fashioned attitudes. We don't accept old-fashioned attitudes in cars, in clothes, in all kinds of things. And you and I were talking at the top of the show about the research that Becca Levy at Yale has done about the power of what you think about yourself and how that actually changes your lifespan. So she's a researcher at Yale, just published a book called Breaking the Age Code. And she's done research on people who are in the hospital that had a positive attitude towards aging versus a negative attitude towards aging. The people with a positive attitude spent less time and less money in the hospital system and lived longer than those who had negative attitude. So let's change our attitude toward ourselves.
Yeah, I think for sure. And I do think, as you said earlier, the boomers are going to lead this charge. I make the analogy that, when I was young, when I was a young man, my mother in the culture, my mother's generation was told, you can be a nurse, you can be a teacher, you can be a housewife, you can be a secretary. Yes, there were always women who were doctors and lawyers and so forth, but the culture put women in the box. Women, through the women's movement, changed all that. And today, a 25-year-old woman looks at the world around her and says, I can be the Prime Minister of Great Britain. I can be the President of the United States. I can be the CEO of Fortune 500. I can be this, and that. What I'm hoping is that the boomers, that we are the ones that are going to write this so that today's 30-year-old says, oh, that's the kind of 70-year-old I can be. Or, oh, that's what 80 can look like. Or, oh, look at Jennifer Lopez at 50-something, or Lenny Kravitz hitting 60, or Sting at 70. That's what 60 looks like.
Exactly.
So I think that's what this is happening. This is the next big social movement in the country. And by the way, what's great about it is it affects and is a positive benefit for everyone, regardless of gender, race, religion, politics. We're all facing this. So this social movement has benefit for everyone, all walks of life, all socioeconomic levels. Because as you said, the attitude about aging and the attitude about, I also like to call it living longer, not getting older. And that's another twist of words. So living longer. I was on a hike in South Dakota in the Badlands last fall, and this man was coming towards me and he was kind of huffing and puffing. He goes, I'm getting old. I said, no, you're not getting old. You're living longer. He brightened up and he smiled and he went, oh, that's a great way of thinking about it. I hadn't thought of it that way. So it's all this kind of stuff that the boomers are going to blow up into smithereens.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to light the match to blow that bomb. That's what I'm trying to do right here. Those who are really interested in ageism, Ashton Applewhite has, the definitive book, This Chair Rocks, on ageism. It really does change our attitude, and we have to stop those, as you did, Michael, so perfectly in the moment when someone says, I'm getting old. No, you're living longer. You're hiking. You're not sitting on a rock. We have to just start doing that wherever we see it. Right. And this goes to every single person listening to this podcast. This is your opportunity to change your mind, your life, and the lives of those around you. If you're getting smarter, help us reach more minds. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends to follow us on social or subscribe to our newsletter at seniorityauthority.org. Don't accept people putting you in these limiting definitions. Don't accept it, reject it, start that counterculture movement. Another good way to start that is by reading Roar, which is the book that Michael wrote, which is fabulous. And Roar is actually an acronym, and it stands for, if you want to do something like learning how to do life layering, Michael in his book, which is a really easy read, very helpful, lots of tips, has explained how to do it, 4 different steps. And the first step is called reimagining yourself, which starts with R. Michael, what do you think stands in the way of most people taking that journey to reimagine themselves?
Yeah, thank you so much for that lovely way you described the book. And to your point, I wanted to make it, I didn't want it to be homework, and I didn't want it to be dense and academic. I wanted it to be, actionable. And that's the feedback I've gotten from so many that it is.
It's super easy. You pick it up, you go through the chapter, you look at the questions, and it's very interactive. So I've shared it with non-reader friends of mine, and they have really enjoyed it. They're like, "Oh, okay, I can figure this out."
Thank you. I think, a few things. One is we touched on it already. People don't open up their minds to think that something else can happen in their life. So one of the points in the tips is that you have to integrate reimagining the same way you integrate nutrition or fitness or wellness into your life. It has to be a daily exercise that you have for your entire life. Mm-hmm. Because what we know is there's always change around us constantly, and we have to adapt and adjust, and we have to make our own proactive choices to reimagine who we want to be. One of the favorite questions in the chapter is, what's your favorite future and what does it look like? And go through the process and go through the practical steps to help do that. So one of it is opening up your mind to the possibilities, regardless of your, somebody said to me, well, I'd like to go back to school, but I don't have the money. There's so much money available for people over 50 to go back to school. It's an excuse.
Yeah.
Or someone said, I'd like to start a fitness regimen, but I'm 70. And I said, gee, when I was running the Toronto Marathon, I watched the first 100-year-old man cross the finish line, and he didn't start running until he was 82.
Wow.
His first marathon was at 82. So how much of it is excuses that we give ourselves, which hold us back? And then the other part of that is people say, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. I don't know where to go. And so there are a few great practical exercises to go through. One of them, for example, is go back to your younger self. What was it that you left on the shelf that you want, you're sort of melancholy about? A great woman in the book that I interviewed was a sales and marketing executive. She always wanted to be a mystery writer. And it gnawed her in her entire life. And finally, in her 50s, she started writing, and she started taking classes and seminars and, master class and all the above. And she wrote a book, and she tried to get it sold. It didn't happen. She wrote a second book. P.S. She's now 66. She's written 6 books published, and she's a mystery writer. So go back to your younger self and reclaim something, as McGarvey Black did. So the R is all about that. So if you like, I can walk you through the other 3 without making it too cumbersome.
Yeah. And I do love going back to your youth, because as you'll see when you read this and when you hear Michael talk about it, it's different for every person. And it is really about who you are, not what others are telling you should or shouldn't do. And we can't continue to listen to, well, that's not, you're too old to do medical school, you're too old to start a fitness program. So yes, can you please walk us through the 4 steps? That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. The O is own your numbers, own your stuff. You have to be cognizant. I was just having this discussion yesterday, and I'm going to pick on my own gender, because men are the ones who I think are the weakest in this area. Own your healthcare, own your basic. You ask an average 50-year-old man mostly, what is your blood pressure? What's your heart rate? What's your, fundamentals? And they look at you like, well, I'm not sure I know that. I'm generalizing. I realize that, but good health is table stakes. It's table stakes to everything. And so own your health numbers, own your financial numbers, because if you're going to live to be 90, and you're now 60 and you're looking at your finances and you're saying, gee, how am I going to do this for 30 years? Yeah, there's Social Security, but what else is going to augment it? The Department of Labor Statistics, U.S. Department of Labor Statistics, says in the next decade, the fastest growing people in the workforce all in are going to be 75 plus, a 96% growth. Yeah, because many of them are going to have to work because they're living longer, and if they don't have an economic foundation, they're going to have to work to be 90. So that's own your numbers and your pathway to get there. Own your age. We talked about that earlier. Own your final number. One of the books that I recommend to people is a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. It's a somber title, but what's great about it is it's a hospice nurse who sat with people for 25 years to hear their themes of their life. And and the theme that really popped out to me, the top theme was, I wish I had been more true to myself. I wish I had done what was meaningful to me, not what my mother wanted, my father wanted, my husband, my wife, my kids, my this, my that, my community, my neighbors. What was important to me? And I think that's a really important lesson. So if you're 60, go to 90 and work backwards. Like, what is it that what is the gap in your life? What are the things that that'll help you hone in on the A. The A is the action plan. So that's okay, we've had enough chatter now, people. This is how you do it. Life layering is one of those parts of the chapter. But what's the plan, man? What's the plan, woman? What's the plan, person? So that is the A. And then the R is reassess your relationships, because it's the people around you who are going to be your support system to help you move into that reimagined place you want to go into. I heard a great story. A woman, she's about 55. She wanted to go back to school and get a master's degree, and her kids were giving her a really hard time. And I said, well, how old are your kids? And she said, well, they're 33 and 31. I said, I hope you're not doing their laundry.
Or making their lunches.
She said, well, it is kind of my fault because I've always been available to them 24/7. I said, maybe it's time for mom. Maybe it's time to have a sit down with the kids and say, listen, kids, I'm 55. I want to do this. I'm going to live to be 90. Like, this is important to me, and get on board.
Yeah, that is crazy to me.
I know, right? Well, this is, that was, there was a generation of kids who had a lot of helicopter parenting that went on.
Still happening.
I know. So, reassess your relationships. How do you get to this next place, and who are the people who are going to help you get there? So, as you said, the book is got lots of inspirational stories, but it's got lots of practical tools and tips and resources and fun little quizzes and games that one can do.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for taking us through those 4 different steps. What I think is really interesting about your whole kind of recipe for doing this is that you suggest people look back towards their youth and their childhood and what sparked their imagination. And then you suggest they look forward and think about, what are you going to regret if you haven't done that? And I think a lot of people have a lack of imagination when it comes to thinking about their future. And I see this all the time. People who have planned so well to get educated, get married, have kids, put them through school, take a vacation. Suddenly, all of the good planning that has had them to such a success, they stop when it comes to 60. And they don't think, because they're afraid of thinking, well, I'm going to die at some point. But you know what? We all are. And not thinking about it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So I think this is not a scary process for people to have a more meaningful life.
Right.
Just think about it.
Well, there's a fun game that I love to tell people to play around this topic. So take 5 words that you describe yourself, and what are your self-definers, identifiers. And don't say parent and spouse, say loyal and et cetera, et cetera. And then go to 10 of your family and friends and ask them to write down 5 words that describe you. They can't share, they can't talk amongst each other. Take those 10 sets of 5 words and map them out. And what does it look like? First of all, do they match up to your self-identifiers? Because we all know the people who say, I'm so empathetic. And you're like, what? You're the least empathetic person we know. It's like, where are you coming from? So does your group, that is your close-in group, see you the same way you see you? So let's start there. And one of the women in the book went through this process in a different way, not this exact way, but the word that kept coming up was funny, 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 funny. And she was an elementary school teacher. She was retiring in her late 50s. And, funny was the word that she got. And her daughter said to her, let's go to Atlanta. They lived outside of Atlanta. let's go to Atlanta and go to an open mic session at a comedy club. And the mother was like, I have no idea what that means. So they go to this club. She said she gets up on stage to this open mic. She starts telling jokes and she became a different person. And she was like, I am funny. And it led to her taking comedy lessons from a woman who trains female comics. And to make a long story short, Patricia Forehand is her name, now is a stand-up comic in her 60s, working the comedy club circuit throughout the whole Southeast. And, she reinvented herself as a comic.
The marvelous Mrs. Maisel in real life.
Exactly. Funny was her word. So I always say to people, what's your word? And then dissect that word and build on it. Where does that word take you? Funny took her to a comedy club. My word was generosity, was the number one word. 9 of 12 people said. Some friends and I launched a foundation called Circle of Generosity. So we took it and launched it into the nonprofit space. So what's your word and what can you do with it? That brings your true self forward and how your immediate world sees you. Okay, now how do you, let's use the word productize that.
I think that is terrific because oftentimes we don't see ourselves clearly. And going to those people who care most about us is a way of, a lot of people, I think purpose is so critical in life, the whole ikigai, having a reason to get up in the morning is what I think stalls a lot of people once they leave their, profession that they're being paid for, or they're done with the raising kids. And this can help you get to that place is to find that purpose. And I think a lot of people are stuck. And this is a perfect book for them.
Yeah. Thank you.
The other thing that I'd like you just to spend a couple minutes on is the importance and your recommendation for how to approach relationships. Because we know that relationships are critical for so many reasons, and yet they are sometimes complicated to cultivate and to keep thriving. And I thought that section of the book was really powerful.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, when we're 50, pick a number, midpoint. I'm going to say we live to be 100. We've accumulated relationships in our lives that take on their patterns and and some of them might be from high school or college or whatever. And some of them are toxic. And we live with that toxicity, whether it's family or friends, and we just sort of live with that toxicity of somebody who's negative or jealous or, any of the bad side of the ledger. And the question is, why? Why do you want to live just because you've had that relationship? Sometimes relationships have to end. And, we've all had painful moments and I ended a very best friend relationship that had to be done, and or a marriage, and or a partnership, and or a business relationship. Mm-hmm. It's all the same. It's relationships are relationships. And then not only do you mine out and take out the toxicity, but then celebrate the positive. Celebrate the people who are really on team YOU, as somebody said in the book. And really, have them rally around you and you rally around them. But at the same time, forming new relationships is really important. And I love to have relationships with people who are in their 80s as well as in their 20s, because I can learn something. As we live longer, we tend to get more, we tend to shrink our relationships, and they tend to be the people who are all sort of in our cohort, our demographic. And so, I have a rule with my friends. You cannot talk about your ailments and you cannot talk about what you had for lunch, because I'm not really interested. So
no organ recitals, as they say.
And so, but if you have people of different ages or in different places on lifespan, you have lots of interesting conversations. And so cultivate those people. And if you're lucky enough, you'll make a new friend, in your 60s. It's very funny. I had a new doctor I went to. I'm going back, 15 years now. So I was in my 50s, and who's recommended, and I needed a new doctor, and this guy and I started talking, and it turns out that he's a marathon runner just like me. So we ended up taking a run in the park one day in New York City. I live in New York City in Central Park. And make a long story short, he's become my best friend. We've run marathons. He and his family and my family, we all travel together. We spend holidays. He just finished the 50 states. I went to Alaska and ran the 49th with him, and Hawaii in the 50th. I said, what a blessing to meet somebody, in my 50s who now in my 60s has become, a great friend. So you meet people along life's journey because you're a different person at 50 than you were at 25.
Oh, thank God. Yes. I do celebrate the fact that, well, I think the gift of getting to that midpoint, 50 plus, is that you know who you are more than when you are in the teens and 20s, which is as it should be. You've been through a few things, and so you should be a little happier with yourself.
This is true. I had the good fortune in my career of launching Oprah Winfrey's magazine with a team of people. And, Oprah, of course, is the penultimate example of this. And we happen to be the same age. And what I love about Oprah is that she talks about every year being another gift of life. And, thinking about if I have another year off of this year, what do I want to do with that time? How do I want to spend that time, use that time? And as we live longer, we also have a different perspective on time, right? And we do see how fragile the time clock is, because none of us know really when we're going to go, but we're going to go. So we just have to maximize every minute. So,
and be happy for where we are.
Right.
So this book has really taken off, and the paperback is coming out in the fall. What is next for Roar?
Yeah, no, it's been a great blessing that it's been so successful. Third printing, as you mentioned. We have a newsletter that people can access at roarbymichaelclinton.com. It's a monthly newsletter. It's a freebie, and we have lots of voices in this topic. So it's not me yammering away. It's a lot of guest voices in the space. We are going to, I'm going to turn this into a little bit of an enterprise as we move into the rest of the year. We're going to have a mastermind, which you might be familiar with. We're going to do a business intelligence report, because this kind of information is really important for business and organizations. It's going to be a business intelligence tool on the new longevity.
Excellent.
It's really critical. We're going to make the rounds with marketers and brands and HR companies, because if you think about the imagery in advertising, it is appalling.
Horrible.
I'll give you a great example. Our company owns A&E, which is History Channel, Lifetime, and we own it with Disney. And I'm still involved in the company as an advisor to our CEO. And A&E did a study. They looked at 20,000 television ads through an artificial intelligence tool in Amazon. And they looked at how many people were represented in advertising in the US, 50 plus, and what was the in situ and the mood of those people. 1 in 10 was 50 plus. 1 in 25 was 50 plus and female. The majority of them were in downbeat, sad, homebound, tech-phobic, ailment.
Looking out the window.
That, appalling when you think about this cohort and how different they are. Here's the meme. The women in the Golden Girls were in their 50s. Now think about the women in Sex and the City. They are in their 50s. They are in their 50s. So there's a disconnect between marketing, branding, imagery, and the reality of what's there.
Huge disconnect. Yeah. I am so excited.
We want to take some of that on in what I'll call the B2B space.
Well, tell me when you go to Hallmark. I'll join you. I am all about that. We've got to catch up to the reality. And that's unusual, because marketing and advertising is aspirational. Yeah. They are not showing aspirational images of adults with life experience.
They're behind this curve for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is awesome. I think this has been a wonderful conversation. And we know a lot about you already from your conversation and from reading your book, but I do a little fast five lightning round. And so I'm wondering if you can share what your great marathoner, very athletic, what's your guilty pleasure?
Oh my gosh, it would definitely be a big plate of Mexican food with margaritas to go and chips and salsa and guacamole and just a big huge Mexican feast.
Okay, I'm ready to go.
Exactly, yeah.
What's your favorite healthy practice?
Well, I do integrate fitness in my life 6 days a week. So I think moving is important. You can do whatever works for you. So I'm a runner. I'm a kayaker. I'm a hiker. I go to the gym. I think balance and weight training is important. So it's fully integrated into my life.
Fantastic. What is guaranteed, Michael, to make you laugh?
I think old Austin Powers movies.
Oh, okay. All right.
Which, by the way, couldn't be made today, by the way.
That is true. That is absolutely true. Besides your own book, what's the last book you loved?
I'm actually reading an incredible book right now. It's called The Chancellor, The Remarkable Odyssey of Angela Merkel.
Yeah, that just came out.
Just came out. Katie Martin wrote it. She was married to Richard Holbrooke and also to Peter Jennings. It's an amazing profile of an amazing woman who, as you know, broke all barriers in her world. And it's highly recommended.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. And you traveled all over the world. What is your favorite escape?
So I've been to 124 countries. So yes, I'm an avid traveler. I continue to do that. We have a home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Santa Fe is magical. For those who are listening who know New Mexico and Santa Fe, it's got everything that I love, from the people, the food, the multiculti, the art, the light, the hiking, the skiing. It's all one big, beautiful package. So, as often as I can get out there, I'm happy to be in Santa Fe. Wonderful.
Wonderful. It is a very beautiful place. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. For all of our listeners, you will find the links to Roar by Michael Clinton in the show notes. It's available everywhere, including on Michael's website, which is called roarmichaelclinton.com.
roarbymichaelclinton.com.
Oh, sorry, roarbymichaelclinton.com.
Yeah.
So check that out to get it from him directly. And I can't thank you enough. Generosity is definitely one of your core traits, and I appreciate you sharing with our listeners today.
It was so great to have this conversation with you. Thank you for the invitation, and I hope everyone took something out of the great chat which we had together.
I think so too. That's our show for today. If you enjoyed it, please tell your friends about us and share so we can reach more minds. Give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and send in your questions on aging. Until next time, enjoy the chance to get smarter about growing older.